Two episodes ago, I left you with homework. I asked you to watch for the moment when something was obvious to the person who saw it, and it never made it to the decision it belonged to. If you actually watched for it, my guess is you did not have to watch very long. If you're new here, that homework is all the setup you need, because today is about where that moment happens, not who it happens to, where. And it is about the person in your organization who is probably standing right in the middle. Let me describe that person, because you have one. There is somebody on your team whose work holds up. The analysis is careful. The read on the business keeps turning out to be right. And every review cycle, the same sentence shows up in their feedback anyway. Work on your communication. Sometimes he wears different clothes. Executive presence. Needs to land the message better. Could be more concise in meetings. But it is the same sentence and it comes back every cycle, softened a little each time, never resolved. So the organization does the thing it knows how to do. It names a development area and it starts coaching. And you know how this goes because you have watched it. And if you have been a manager for more than a few years, you have probably run it yourself. The coaching cycle runs. The person adjusts what they can adjust. And the same read keeps dying in the same rooms. Maybe you are that person. Maybe you have sat on the receiving end of that feedback for years, done everything the coaching asked, and watched the sentence come back anyway. If that is you, what I am about to say is going to sound different than it does to everyone else. And I will get to why. Here's the thing I want you to hold on to from this whole episode. If this were really a problem living inside a person, the standard treatments would eventually work. Coaching works on things coaching can reach. It keeps not working here. And when a treatment keeps not working, at some point, the honest conclusion stops being that the patient is stubborn. The honest conclusion is that the diagnosis put the problem in the wrong place. Now, zoom out with me for a minute, because I want to give you the picture this whole season is built on. If you take nothing else from today, take this picture. Every decision your organization makes sits at the end of a line. The line starts with something one person knows, a warning, a read on a customer, a number that is not going to hold. And the line ends at a judgment somebody acts on. Ship it or hold it, fund it or kill it, promote her or pass. Every decision you have ever been part of ran down some version of that line, from what somebody knew to what somebody decided. And that line has crossings on it, places where the thing traveling can die before it arrives. The first crossing, the very first one, sits between the person who knows and the room that decides. It is the space between how that person thinks and how that room listens. I call that space the interface. And what dies at the interface never reaches the judgment at the far end of the line. It does not arrive damaged. It does not arrive late. It just never arrives. Nobody logs the loss. The person we started with, the capable one who keeps getting the communication feedback, is usually standing at that first crossing. That is the connection I want to make today. The coaching loop that never resolves, and the signal that never arrives at the same event, seen from two different chairs. There is an old engineering idea that names what is going wrong at the crossing. And one of you actually captured this for me perfectly. So let me use it. Signal to noise. Every channel that carries information carries both the signal you want and the noise you do not. And a receiver is only as good as its ability to tell one from the other. That is the whole discipline. A channel that cannot separate signal from noise is not a channel. It is a coin flip. Now here's the uncomfortable part. An interface nobody designed does not sort what people say by content. It sorts by style. Fluent, confident, quick delivery passes a signal, whatever it happens to be carrying. Careful, qualified, deliberate delivery gets discarded as noise, whatever it happens to be carrying. You can watch this filter run in any leadership meeting this week, and I actually want you to. The confident summary collects the nods. The hedged correction, the one that starts with, I might be missing something, but gets parked for a follow-up that never happens. That is an organization confusing noise for signal. And notice that it runs in both directions at once. A wrong idea delivered with polish sails through the exact same filter that just threw away a right idea because it showed up plain. You are not just losing the good reads, you are letting the bad ones through on style points at the same time. So, what does that actually cost? Let me follow the money for a minute, because this is the part that never shows up anywhere. When the room reads a person's delivery instead of their content, the read that that person was carrying does not arrive, and the decision it belongs to gets made without it. Then the organization starts paying. It pays for the coaching engagement. Then it pays for the performance plan when the coaching does not take. And often enough, it ends up paying for a backfill and 6 months of ramp time because people who keep hearing that the problem is them eventually leave. Or they stop getting invited. They get quietly rotated out of the rooms where the decisions happen. And either way, the read they were carrying leaves with them. And here is why nobody ever adds this up. The bill splits across levels. The middle manager is the one running the coaching conversation. The executive is the one approving the development spend. And the decision that went wrong for want of the read goes wrong, somewhere above both of them, with an explanation attached that has nothing to do with communication. Bad luck, bad execution, market move. The coaching gets booked as development. The departure gets booked as fit. And the actual loss, the judgment that failed to arrive, gets booked nowhere. There is no line item in any P&L I have ever seen for a judgment that failed to arrive. Every organization pays it. Almost none of them can name it. Now, before I give you the reframe, I want to show you the piece of evidence that gives the misdiagnosis away. Because once you see this, you cannot unsee it. Every communication failure has two ends. By definition, something was sent one way and received another way, which means both sides of the exchange failed to bridge the gap, the sender and the receiver together. Now ask yourself, in your organization, who gets diagnosed? Because if the failure really lives inside the people, the diagnosis would land on both ends of the exchange at roughly the same rate. Sometimes the sender needs coaching. Sometimes the room needs to learn how to listen. Roughly even. That is never what happens. The diagnosis lands almost every time on one end. And it is reliably the person whose style sits further from the organization's default. The room never gets the development plan. The listening never gets flagged in a review. One end of the exchange gets received, and the other end gets routed into coaching. That asymmetry is the tell. It is the misdiagnosis confessing. I want to say the next part carefully, because it runs against an entire industry. And honestly, it runs against most of what organizations buy under the name of communication training. Language is important. Words are important. Leadership is influence, and influence runs on language. I am not walking any of that back. But somewhere along the way, organizations confuse the dominant language for the right language and the dominant way of influencing for the right way to. Think about what that training actually teaches. Be fluent in the meeting. Be quick in the moment. Project confidence. That is not a description of correct communication. That is a description of the style the room happened to be built around. It got treated as a standard. It was only ever a default. So here is the reframe. And it is where the framework this whole season builds comes in. It is called the Cognitive Translation Protocol. And it starts with one claim. I will say it exactly the way the framework says it. A communication failure happens at the interface between two cognitive systems, not inside either one. You have already seen the evidence for this. You have just never had the frame to file it under. Let me give you 3 moments and see if you recognize them. A director gets asked a question in a leadership meeting and answers exactly the question that was asked, precisely, completely. And the room hears an unwillingness to commit because what the room wanted was not the answer. It was reassurance. Nobody said so. Somebody asks for a quick gut check and gets 20 careful minutes because on the other side of the table, that question meant something entirely different. The asker wanted a feeling. The person asked heard a request for analysis because to them, that is what a check is. 2 people walk out of the same meeting with 2 different decisions written in their notes. Both were in the room the whole time. Both were paying attention. In every one of those moments, both people did their part correctly. and the exchange still failed because the failure did not happen inside either person. It happened in the space between them. And in your organization, I would bet money that nobody owns that space. Nobody designed it. Nobody audits it. Nobody's accountable for what dies in it. That is why the fix is structural. You cannot coach your way out of a space nobody built. Now, I want to spend a minute on where this lens comes from because it did not come from a book. I come to this from the side of the exchange that gets diagnosed. My own communication runs literal, explicit, and deliberate. What most rooms process automatically, the tone, the subtext, the read of what the question really wants, I process the long way, on purpose, step by step. And it shows in the timing and in the shape of what comes out of me. The answer arrives a beat late because I built it instead of feeling it. It arrives precise because precision is how I know it is true. And for years, organizations read all of that as communication deficit in me. Every coaching conversation aimed at my delivery, softer openings, faster answers, more warmth in the follow up. And the whole time, the content of what I was saying sat there, unexamined. Nobody asked whether the read was right. The delivery had already been filed. But here's what I could see that the room could not. From inside the exchange, I could watch the actual event happen in real time. What was actually occurring was a translation mismatch between two ways of processing, and it got recorded every single time as a deficiency in one of them, mine. The neurodiversity movement gave what I was living its structural name. Different nervous systems produce different cognitive architectures. They shape thinking, sensing, and processing across mind and body, not broken brains. And then an exchange between two people, that shaping runs in both directions at once. It shapes how information comes into a mind, and it shapes how it gets back out. Communication is not a coat of paint on top of thinking, it is cognition at both ends, every time. The brain economy prices what the misdiagnosis wastes. Cognitive capacity is the economic variable now. And the effort a person spends on being understood is drawn from the same capacity you hired them to think with. You can see the spend in an ordinary workday if you look. The email rewritten 4 times before it goes out. The extra hour of preparation before a 30-minute meeting. Not to sharpen the analysis, but to armor the delivery. I named that overhead the translation tax in one of the first essays of this whole body of work. What I could not fully name back then was the structure that levies the tax. Now I can. It is the undesigned interface, and it levies the tax on the people you hired to think. There's one more piece of the old frame worth pulling out, and is hiding in your HR system right now. Go open your competency model and look at where the communication lives. It is filed as a personal attribute, listed next to integrity and drive. Score one person at a time. That filing label looks harmless, and it is doing enormous work because it decides, before anyone has looked at a word of content, whose problem of communication failure is going to be. File communication under soft skills, and every interface failure in your organization automatically becomes somebody's development plan. See it for what it is, a cognitive process running between two people, and the failure becomes something else entirely. It becomes something you can design against. So let us talk about the design, because this is where it gets practical. And honestly, this is the part I most want you to leave with. When you move the problem off the person and onto the interface, the intervention moves too. Deficit model spends its budget redesigning the person. Interface model designs the channel. And the channel is made of completely ordinary things you already control at whatever level you lead from. If you run a team, you own the format of every meeting you run. If you run a function, you own the defaults that every meeting in that function inherits. Nobody has to approve this. It is already yours. The meeting format is the first one. If the only path the read can take into a decision is a fast verbal exchange in a full room, think about what that interface selects for. It selects for fast verbal processors. Everyone else's contribution lands on the floor. A written pre-read changes what survives that room. A real asynchronous path changes it more, because analysis gets to arrive in the shape it was actually produced in. instead of the shape the meeting allows. Shared context is the second one. A room that establishes what everyone knows before it judges what anyone said hears different things than a room that is inferring intent from tone in real time. And the third one, make the route explicit. A read that matters can be given a defined path to the decision it belongs to. A path that does not depend on the sender performing fluency live in the moment under the lights. Your board already works this way, by the way. A board does not depend on hallway conversation for the numbers it governs by. It builds a design channel because the signal mattered too much to leave the style. The same logic, one level down, is all I'm describing. One caution before anyone files this in the wrong drawer. These are changes to the channel. The reflex to file them under accommodation, in the HR sense, is the deficit model sneaking back in, quietly relocating the problem inside a person who needs special handling. A design channel gets more true signal through for everyone on it. The deliberate processor finally gets their read into the room, and the fast, intuitive processor gets decisions made on better inputs. Everybody on the channel wins. Now the word interface can sound like fog, like a vague space between people. It is not. It has the structure. The framework names 6 specific points where signal between two cognitive systems gets lost: inference, timing, signal clarity, sensory load, emotional attribution, and execution visibility. You've already met 2 of them today. The gut check that came back as 20 careful minutes, that was inference failing. The answer that arrives a beat late into a fast room, that is timing. Some of the 6 fail before a word is spoken. Some fail after everyone believes the exchange succeeded, which is exactly why you cannot see them from the inside any single conversation. Next episode, we walk all 6, one at a time, as an audit you can actually run on your organization. Consider that a trailer. Before we land this, the take home. Every essay in this phase of the work closes with the same box. I call it the operating brief. One moment, the default, the redesign, and a test you can run Monday. Here is this week's out loud. The moment. A capable person on your team is heading into the communication conversation again. The review that is about to say executive presence. The coaching cycle about to be commissioned. The quiet decision forming about who belongs in the room. The default and what it costs. Coach the person toward the dominant style. The cost is that read they are carrying keeps dying in the same place. The spend gets booked as their development, and the lost signal gets booked nowhere. The failure never lived in the person, so it survives the coaching intact, while the channel it actually happens in goes on undesigned. The redesign takes one recurring communication failure you have been attributing to a person and relocate it at the interface. Then design the channel it keeps dying, written path into the decision. Shared context before the room judges delivery. That is usually enough to start. And the Monday test. This one is simple, and I mean it literally. In your next conversation about someone's communication problem, ask for the content of what they were trying to get across, because you discuss how it came across. Just that. Content first, delivery second. If the content is good, the interface is what failed, and coaching the person will not fix an interface. Let me give you the exit ramp, and then the point. This season is the first of 3 moves, and the order is not decorative. The moves after this one, placing the judgment and routing the work, both run on whatever survives the first crossing. A decision built on a read that arrived garbled is garbled at the source, and no amount of good governance downstream can repair it. That is why the signal comes first. Everything at the far end of the line inherits a quality. So here is the point. The one thing to carry out of this episode: when communication breaks between 2 people who think differently, look at the channel before you look at the person. The signal your organization needs most is dying in transit right now, across interfaces nobody designed, and it is being carried by the exact people the deficit model keeps sending to coaching. Design the interface, and the signal starts arriving. The 6 places it dies is the next episode, one at a time.